The photograph sits in an archive drawer, wrapped in thin tissue paper. A simple wedding portrait. Two young newlyweds, stiff-backed, dressed in their best clothes, staring into a camera that would freeze them in time forever. Soft light washes over their faces. The groom's hand rests confidently on the back of a wooden chair. The bride's dress is heavy with lace, her veil pinned carefully, her eyes calm, almost too calm. For more than a century, this image was catalogued as ordinary. Just another 19th century wedding photograph. Until someone noticed her hand. A restoration technician zooms in on the original glass plate negative. Dust and scratches disappear under digital tools. The image sharpens. The fabric becomes texture. The shadows deepen. And there it is. In the bride's right hand, something small, deliberate, and clearly placed. Not a flower. Not jewelry. Something clenched, purposeful. Pause there, the researcher says quietly. The room is silent except for the hum of archival equipment. The object looks intentional, almost symbolic. A tiny carved token, its surface etched with a faint geometric mark. It doesn't match wedding traditions of the era. It doesn't appear in any bridal fashion record. It looks out of place. A historian leans closer to the screen. That's not decorative, she murmurs. That's a message. A dusty ledger is pulled from storage, marriage records from the same town, the same year. Another box yields a handwritten diary, brittle pages tied with faded ribbon. Inside, a line stands out, written weeks before the wedding. She agreed, but not freely. She left a sign, in case someone would one day look closely. The camera lingers on the bride's face. Her expression no longer feels peaceful. It feels deliberate. Somewhere between love and warning, between tradition and silent defiance, she left something in plain sight, hidden for more than 100 years. And now, finally, someone is looking closely. The restoration begins as a routine technical process, not an investigation. The glass plate negative is lifted from its sleeve under controlled light. Its edges are chipped, the surface spidered with hairline cracks, damage from decades of handling, storage, and neglect. To the naked eye, the image looks complete. A bride and groom, seated. Balanced. Formal. Finished. But restoration is about removing time, layer by layer. On a high-resolution monitor, the technician starts peeling back a century of dust. Scratches vanish. Chemical stains fade. The grayscale deepens. Fabric fibers emerge in startling clarity, the weave of the groom's coat, the fine lace stitched into the bride's sleeves. Then the zoom tightens. Hands. At first, it's just shadow. A darker shape near the bride's waist, partially swallowed by the folds of her dress. The technician adjusts contrast. Brightens highlights. Sharpens edges. The shape doesn't disappear. It becomes clearer. Something is resting in her right hand. Not loosely held. Not accidental. Clenched. The room slows. Restoration work usually reveals faces, eyes, expressions, hidden smiles. It rarely reveals intent. But this does. The object is small, no bigger than a matchbox, with hard edges that don't belong to fabric or skin. It catches light differently, reflecting just enough to signal it's solid. Zoom in more, the archivist says. At 800% magnification, faint markings surface. A shallow carving. Angular. Repeating lines forming a symbol that doesn't resemble jewelry, rosary beads, or any known wedding accessory of the period. It isn't listed in bridal catalogs. It doesn't appear in etiquette manuals. And crucially, no other wedding portrait from the same decade shows anything like it. The question shifts instantly from what to why. If the bride wanted to hide the object, she could have. The dress has layers. Pockets. Space. But instead, she holds it where the camera can see it, barely, but intentionally. A historian later describes this moment as the photograph, breaking its silence. Because portraits of this era were controlled performances. Subjects were posed, corrected, instructed. Every visible detail was deliberate. Which means the object passed through multiple moments where it could have been removed, by a photographer, by a family member, by the groom. But it wasn't. That suggests consent. or fear, or urgency. The restoration log notes the discovery with understated language, asterisk, unidentified handheld object visible post-cleaning. Asterisk, but the tone in the room has already changed. What was once a decorative artifact now feels like evidence. The bride's calm expression is reinterpreted. Not serenity, control. This isn't just a clearer image. It's the first time the photograph tells the truth it's been holding back for over 100 years. The photograph's tiny revelation, the object in the bride's hand, was enough to pique the curiosity of the archivist, but to understand its meaning required expertise far beyond restoration. Enter Dr. Eleanor Price, a historian specializing in Victorian-era social customs and clandestine societies. She squints at the high-resolution images, adjusting the contrast and zooming in on the etchings. The carvings are angular, geometric, too precise to be accidental. This isn't ordinary, she says quietly, her finger tracing the faint lines on the screen. Look at the pattern. See how it repeats in a triangular formation. That's intentional. Very intentional. Dr. Price has spent years studying symbols that were used in private, secret gatherings, often by women or marginalized groups seeking to communicate messages discreetly. Some were markers of allegiance, others were silent warnings, and a few were used as protective talismans against threats in a world that offered women little power. I've seen this pattern before, she continues, leaning back in her chair. It's part of a set of tokens used by a small, localized network of women's societies in the 1880s and 1890s. They weren't mainstream. There's barely any record of them in public archives because secrecy was everything. Her explanation shifts the narrative completely. The photograph was no longer just a wedding image, it was potentially a coded document. A historian's eyes are trained to see context, and here, the context was extraordinary. These societies were often misunderstood, dismissed as superstition, but their members created small objects, carved or sewn into everyday items, to convey messages only insiders could interpret. In some cases, they were used to indicate danger, to communicate that a woman needed help, or to assert subtle defiance against societal constraints. Dr. Price references a few surviving examples: a carved wooden pendant, a small token hidden inside a bonnet, a ring etched with similar geometric marks. Most of these items were never publicly documented and were often passed down through families without explanation. This token, she says, pointing to the photograph, is an incredibly rare example because it was photographed. Most of these objects never left private hands. They weren't meant for display. And yet, here it is, captured for posterity, held in her hand deliberately. She wanted someone to notice it, one day. The historian's assessment reframes the object as more than a curiosity. It is a deliberate symbol, a secret language, a message preserved in plain sight. The newlyweds portrait, once mundane, becomes a portal into a hidden network of social defiance, a world previously invisible, whose whispers have survived silently for over a century. This discovery raises immediate questions. Why did the bride hold it so openly? Was the token a signal to someone in particular? And how does a single carved object in a photograph redefine our understanding of the woman who held it? The investigation is no longer about restoration, it's about unlocking a secret history that has been waiting to speak. After the historian identifies the object in the bride's hand as a symbolic token of secrecy, the investigation pivots from symbols to human lives. The research team begins combing through public records, private collections, and estate archives in the small town where the couple lived. It's in an old wooden trunk in the corner of a dusty attic that the next breakthrough occurs. Inside, wrapped in yellowed tissue, is a leather-bound journal, worn, fragile, and unmistakably personal. Its cover bears the initials of the groom's family, and the brittle pages are filled with cramped, precise handwriting. The first entries read like mundane family affairs, accounts of farm work, visits from neighbors, the occasional local gossip. But as the team flips deeper, the tone shifts. One page, dated just weeks before the wedding, stands out. She is reluctant, though she will not speak aloud. There is little we can do. The marriage must proceed. The words are underlined twice, as if emphasizing the unavoidable truth. A descendant of the family, present during the examination, hesitates, visibly shaken. I never knew anything like this, she murmurs. We were told the marriage was happy. That it was, a union of love. The researcher nods. Public appearances often mask private realities, she says softly. And sometimes, evidence lies hidden in the margins, in journals, letters, or objects no one thought to look at. As the pages are examined, more details emerge, entries mentioning pressure from the groom's parents, social obligations, and the looming expectation to consolidate wealth and status. The bride's name appears repeatedly, but always in indirect references, always in careful wording designed to avoid direct confrontation. There is fear, but also agency, a subtle act of resistance, mirrored perhaps in the small token she holds in the wedding photograph. The juxtaposition is striking. While the outward image in the portrait shows a serene bride, the journal paints a different picture, a young woman caught between duty and desire, navigating social structures that left her little room for choice. The secretive token now seems less like a decorative trinket and more like a lifeline, a private signal acknowledging her situation. Experts describe this as a pattern seen in historical cases of constrained marriages. Women would find small, discreet ways to assert agency, communicate warnings, or preserve their story for future observers. The journal not only confirms that the marriage may not have been voluntary but also gives context to the token in her hand. It transforms the photograph from a static image into a moment of quiet rebellion, a frozen gesture signaling awareness, resistance, and an unspoken plea to anyone perceptive enough to see it. Suddenly, the story isn't just about a mysterious object in a hand. It's about a woman navigating an oppressive world, leaving a breadcrumb of truth for posterity, and challenging the narrative written by her society and her family. The mystery deepens, bridging the symbolic and the human, the secret and the lived experience. Following the discovery of the journal and the revelation that the bride's marriage may not have been voluntary, the investigation turns outward, into the geography of her world. Archivists begin cross-referencing the groom's family estate records with census data, land deeds, and historical maps. That's when an obscure reference catches their attention, a small, nearly forgotten settlement on the outskirts of the county, labeled on an 1889 survey map as Hawthorne Hollow. It appears on no modern maps, and local historians describe it as a community that disappeared overnight, decades ago. Curiosity turns to urgency when the team finds that the journal contains odd annotations, tiny symbols in the margins, matching the geometric carvings on the token in the bride's hand. Dots, triangles, and short lines are scattered next to entries mentioning travel, distant relatives, and even weather patterns. At first, they seem decorative, but overlaying them onto the old map reveals a startling pattern. The symbols correspond to specific locations within Hawthorne Hollow. Dr. Price, the historian, examines the map under a magnifying lens. These aren't random, she says. They're coordinates of some sort, a private navigation system. Combined with the token, it suggests she knew something the rest of the family did not. The team digs deeper into local archives. Hawthorne Hollow, once home to several small families, vanishes from official records after 1890. Land deeds are incomplete. Court records hint at disappearances, but names are often obscured or misfiled. Researchers discover a series of missing persons reports filed around the same time as the bride's wedding. While most were dismissed or ignored at the time, some documents hint at familial disputes, elopements, and unexplained absences. One record is particularly chilling, a woman listed as missing under suspicious circumstances, her description eerily similar to the bride in the portrait. Though the case never went to trial, the notation suggests she may have fled, or been forced from, the settlement. The correlation is undeniable. The token, the journal symbols, and the map collectively indicate that the bride's hand gesture in the portrait was not merely decorative. It may have been a deliberate signal pointing to Hawthorne Hollow, linking her personal story to a wider network of danger, secrecy, and survival. Experts describe this as a rare example of a multidimensional historical puzzle, a physical artifact, a written diary, and geographic markers converge to reveal a narrative long hidden. The photograph, previously understood as a static moment, now becomes a key to decoding an entire vanished world. This turning point expands the story beyond the couple. It introduces mystery, danger, and a network of lost lives, showing that one small object in a bride's hand can ripple outward across history, geography, and human memory, challenging what we think we know about the past and forcing a new reckoning with what was deliberately hidden. As the investigation progresses, the team begins reaching out to living relatives connected to both the bride and groom. This is a delicate process. Some families guard their histories fiercely, while others have lost all memory of past events. It is during one such meeting, in a quiet suburban home filled with faded photographs and dust-covered heirlooms, that the next breakthrough occurs. A great-great-granddaughter of the bride, Emma Caldwell, opens a worn wooden chest in the corner of the room. Inside are letters, faded newspaper clippings, and personal mementos, most of which have never been shared with historians. Emma pulls out a bundle of letters tied with a fraying ribbon. The handwriting is unmistakably that of her great-great-grandmother. Unlike the groom's family journal, these letters are raw and deeply personal. The first line she reads aloud catches everyone off guard. "I wear the ring, I pose for the picture, but they do not know I am not here by choice." The room falls silent. Even decades later, the weight of these words is palpable. These letters confirm what the journal hinted at: the marriage was not a voluntary union of affection, but a carefully orchestrated arrangement, likely driven by social, financial, or familial pressures. The letters reveal a side of the bride entirely absent from public narratives. She writes of secret plans to protect herself and others, of coded signals she could leave behind, and of the token she held in the portrait, a signal for someone attuned enough to notice. One entry mentions her hope that, one day, someone will see the small object in my hand and understand. The implication is chilling: she intentionally left the token for future discovery, preserving her story through an object that would outlive her. Emma's presence adds a human dimension to the investigation. She reflects on family stories she grew up with, tales of a happy marriage and a serene bride, which now seem to have been carefully curated. The letters she uncovers directly contradict these sanitized narratives, offering the first-hand insight into the bride's true experience. The descendants' discovery transforms the investigation. No longer is the story just a historical puzzle, it becomes an intensely personal narrative bridging past and present. Researchers see the object, the token, and the coded symbols in a new light, not merely as artifacts, but as deliberate acts of communication, courage, and resistance. This moment marks a turning point in the documentary. The investigation moves from the realm of symbols and maps into the intimate sphere of human experience. The bride's hidden story is no longer abstract, it is alive, resonating across generations, and it challenges every previous assumption about the photograph, the marriage, and the woman whose hand held a secret meant to be discovered only by those patient enough to look closely. With the bride's story partially revealed through the journal and the letters, attention returns to the small object in her hand. What had initially seemed like a curious token now demands deeper analysis. The research team brings in Dr. Margaret Halloway, a cultural historian specializing in women's clandestine networks of the 19th century. In her study, she has examined countless examples of objects women used to communicate in societies that afforded them little voice. Dr. Halloway examines the high-resolution images of the portrait. She notes the geometric pattern etched into the object, angular lines forming triangles and dots, arranged deliberately. She leans forward, her voice calm but intense. "This isn't mere decoration," she explains. Symbols like this were often used as silent warnings. They were a visual language, understood only by those within a specific social or cultural context. A woman in the 19th century, constrained by social expectations, could communicate urgency, danger, or resistance without speaking a word. She could leave a mark that spoke louder than letters ever could. Halloway shows the team examples from her archive: carved pendants, hidden charms sewn into hems, and small tokens that women carried discreetly. Each served a purpose: protection, a call for help, or signaling that a situation was unsafe. Some indicated that a woman was under duress, while others warned of predatory individuals within her social circle. They were rarely documented publicly, often passed quietly between generations, and almost always overlooked by historians who dismissed them as trinkets. The research team compares the bride's token to these historical examples. The similarities are striking: the shape, the geometric markings, the deliberate way it is held for visibility in the photograph, all point to intentional signaling. Dr. Halloway concludes that the bride was sending a message, a warning. The token is not merely symbolic, it is functional. It communicates that her apparent consent or compliance in the marriage may have been coerced, and that there was a hidden risk she needed to convey to someone who could understand. This insight redefines the portrait. The bride's serene expression, previously interpreted as passive or compliant, now takes on a sharper edge. Her hand, holding the token, is no longer an incidental gesture, it is an act of agency, a deliberate warning embedded in the image. The discovery also highlights the broader historical context. Women in this era often had to navigate dangerous social structures quietly. Symbols like the one in her hand allowed them to communicate with subtlety and strategy. It is a rare visual record of a private language of survival, frozen in a single photograph for posterity. By uncovering this meaning, experts transform the portrait from a static artifact into a message across time, a warning, a secret, and a testament to courage. It cements the bride as a deliberate actor, quietly defying her circumstances, and challenges viewers to reconsider what they think they know about history, power, and resistance. By the time the research team reaches the seventh turning point, the photograph has transformed from a simple wedding portrait into a document of hidden histories. Every layer of investigation, the restoration revealing the token, the historian identifying it as a symbol of secret societies, the groom's family journal hinting at coercion, the coded map and vanished settlement, the letters from the bride's descendant, and the expert confirmation of the token as a warning, has converged to create a profound narrative about agency, secrecy, and resistance. The portrait, once considered mundane, now serves as visual evidence of a silent rebellion. The bride's hand, holding that small carved object, becomes emblematic of the ways women historically communicated under duress. In an era when societal norms constrained them, when family obligations and patriarchal expectations often dictated life-altering decisions, a seemingly minor act, holding a token in a photograph, could serve as a lifeline, a message, and a claim to autonomy. Dr. Eleanor Price reflects on the broader significance. This image challenges how we view women's roles in history. It reminds us that the historical record is often incomplete. What appears ordinary can conceal acts of courage, cleverness, and resistance. It's a visual testament to survival strategies that were invisible to the mainstream eye. The descendant, Emma Caldwell, expresses a similar realization. The portrait is no longer just a family keepsake, it is a tangible link to her ancestors' ingenuity, bravery, and desire to be remembered on her own terms. It reframes her family history and forces a re-evaluation of the narratives passed down over generations. Historians begin to see parallels across other overlooked artifacts. Photographs, letters, tokens, and personal objects, all previously dismissed as decorative or incidental, may in fact carry deeper meaning, revealing hidden struggles, secret communications, or subtle resistance. The discovery suggests that history itself is layered with messages waiting to be decoded, often requiring patience, attention, and cross-disciplinary analysis. Cinematically, the portrait now functions as both evidence and symbol. In documentary footage, the camera lingers on the bride's expression, the faint etching of the token, and the texture of her dress. Close-ups of archival documents, letters, and maps intercut with modern expert analysis create a visual narrative that bridges past and present. The audience witnesses the unfolding of a historical revelation, feeling both the intimacy of personal struggle and the weight of societal pressures. Ultimately, the portrait is no longer just a visual record, it is a story of survival, a declaration of agency, and a reminder that even in constrained circumstances, individuals find ways to assert themselves. The investigation reframes how we interpret history, not as a series of static facts, but as a living, layered tapestry where even the smallest detail can reveal profound truths about human resilience, courage, and the quiet defiance of those who came before us.